Muscle Shoals. That was the hot spot.
We were noted for the black music we cut, and people loved what we did.
All kind of people were coming to make records in Muscle Shoals. Why? Because of the Muscle Shoals sound.
Oh, I guess I have to put your flat feet on the ground. When I said that.
So the Muscle Shoals sound is basically funk, R&B, a big round with a lot of bottom, a lot of bass. We call it dirt and soul.
Here was these guys playing on Wilson Pickett records. Mustang Saddle, Land of a Thousand Dances, When a Man Loves a Woman, all this stuff, right? And we were all white boys. One thing you got to realize, we come out of that period out of the 50s and 60s there when all that trouble was going on in Selma, Little Rock, Jackson, Mississippi, Oxford, Mississippi, and Birmingham, Alabama.
There was no friction or problem with blacks and whites playing together in the studio. In fact, we never thought of
I need somebody to help me say it one time.
it. Duane Allman came to Muscle Shoals to meet with me and wanted to be a session picker.
He was a freak at that time around here because we were all wearing our Weegians and our khaki pants.
I said, I don't have need for a session player. He said, well, do you mind if I stick around anyhow? I'll just pitch my pup tent out on the parking lot, and I'll just hang around.
And I had never really, truly met a free spirit person until I met him.
We were recording Wilson Pickett, and he just showed up.
Tom Dow was a great engineer from Atlantic, and Rick did a joint production on this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Back then, it was a little touchy for a black guy to go out with, say, 5 or 6 white guys to eat. And Duane was in a precarious situation. He had long hair. And people had long hair that went out with us, got worse looks than the black guys. And so the two of them stayed back, and that's when Duane talked him into doing Hey Jude.
He started playing the guitar.
Hey, Jude, don't make it bad.
Pickett started working with him on the guitar, and it started sounding better and better, and so Pickett got enthused and started getting into it more.
I don't have to tell you how much fun we had on this.
We started running the tune down, and Duane had this little guitar riff.
Starting on the vamp, we hit an incredible groove.
Make it better.
Here we go. Get ready, Allman Brothers.
It was the record, I mean, the little lick.
And that particular part that Duane played changed music. It changed music to the point that Southern rock was introduced.
When I sent Wexler the record of Hey Jude on Wilson Pickett, he called me back on the phone with his heavy New York Jewish accent. He said, Rick, a stroke of genius. Of course, it was Duane's idea, but I took credit for it. I told Phil Walden about it.
He said, I want to play you the new Wilson Pickett session.
Phil Walden owned Capricorn with Atlantic. Phil started out as a manager in a booking agency that he ran out of Macon, Georgia.
And I said, wow, who's that guitar player? Long-haired hippie boy. He sounds fabulous. He's always said he's unbelievable. This guy is unbelievable. And I said, well, I'm going to Alabama. I'm going to sign him. I'm going to put a band together.
Phil Walden wanted me to go down to Muscle Shoals to meet with Duane. He said, you got to hear this white boy down there. Said he's a hippie man. Said you got to hear this guy play guitar. He wants to know if you'd play in the band with him. And I remember this friend of mine. He said, if you want to make money, he said, go play with them white boys. My little light bulb went off in my head. Bing. Oh, make some money, huh? So what the hell? I walked over to this guy and I said, hey, man, are you Skyman? Because Wilson Pickett gave him this name, Skyman, because he used to play that bottle, and he played so high on the guitar, making all those birds kind of sounds. You're J. Johnny Johnson. I said, yep. From that day on, it was what it was.
Duane came to me. He said, I need to ride around and jam with some people and play and see who's out there and see who thinks like I think and come up with something.
And he goes,
Duane was going to take Barry Oakley out of our band. And so it was going to be J-Mo and Barry Oakley and Duane. Duane would be sitting in with us a lot, and he and I were making this magic, you know, just right off the cuff. So they came to me and said, why don't you join our band? And I said, well, okay.
There's a knock at my door, and it's Duane and J-Mo. And then Duane came inside there for 5 minutes, got up and walked out and left J-Mo sitting there. And he's just sitting there like this, with giant muscles and a tank top on and his bear tooth claw thing around his neck. And I'm going, God damn, a militant, he's going to kill me. We've been 35 years, the best friend I have in the world.
So Truck showed up. And as soon as he got up with me and Duane and Barry and Jay, you know, all of a sudden we're starting to see a band.
We started out this shuffle, and about 4 hours later, we stopped.
There was a lot of freedom and stuff in what we were doing.
I'd be crying one minute, chill bumps the next minute.
Who were in a direction that made sense, then everybody just kind of went along and supported it.
It was just magic. Duane walked to the door and said, okay, anybody in this room not gonna play in my band, you gotta fight your way out of here.
When we were in Muscle Shoals, Duane used to tell me, there ain't but one person that can sing in this band that I got in my head. He said, that's my brother.
the phone rang. It was my brother, and he said, man, I got these guys together. I got tired of being in the studio. I need you to come back here, round up this whole thing, and send it somewhere.
About halfway through that rehearsal, Greg showed up.
And they started playing, and I mean, it just knocked me out.
Went back against the wall. He said, Jesus, what a band.
He says, what's the matter? I said, man, I don't think I can cut this. And he goes in, you little punk.
He said, shut up, get behind the organ.
And I just snatched some lyrics, and I did my best to sing it my best.
Sometimes I feel like I'm dying.
We all piled into a Ford Econoline and went to Macon, Georgia, and moved up there.
We got chased out of Jacksonville finally by the law. Because we're having like 10,000 people show up these Sunday afternoons. I'm sorry, but there was some drug dealing going on, too, you know. You know, it was innocent, some acid and some pot.
He finally called. He says, we got it together. Fixed us up with a place to live in Macon, and we headed that way.
Moved into a two-room apartment we called the Hippie Crash Pad.
And one had 12 mattresses in it, and the other one had all our gear in it.
Only furniture in it was a Coke machine full of beer.
And we would get up in the morning, we'd have a little breakfast, we would take some mushrooms. We started playing, next thing you know, it'd be dark. We did this for about 6 straight weeks.
They were the first long hairs anybody had ever seen in Macon. Sometimes they would sit out in the front and be playing guitars and whatnot, and cars would literally just screech to a stop, and people would break their necks looking and staring at them.
One Sunday, we just decided to go to Atlanta and find a part and just set up and start playing. hour or two, there's 2,000 or 3,000 kids standing around, and you know, all the damn hippies were hanging out that week, and the underground newspaper called the Great Speckled Bird had discovered the new band of the revolution.
The South, I mean, it just, that kind of thing wasn't happening here. But as we traveled around, you know, everybody else started getting it, except the record companies.
The people at Atlantic were telling him, you know, hey, you got a white band from the South just standing there playing? What are you, crazy? So get that kid out behind the organ, put some velvet pants on him, stick a salami down his pants, and let him jump around like Robert Plant. Maybe you got a chance. And Phil said, no, I believe in these guys. And they said, well, then you pay for it.
I mortgaged everything for this thing. I believed in it that much. They never would have spent the money that I spent over that next 2 years. I had several $100,000 in it. We're talking about late 60s, early 70s money. That's like millions of dollars today. And it was unheard of.
We went up and Adrian Barber engineered and produced the first record. Phil Walden had a thermometer on the back of his door.
To fill up the bottom would be like, I don't know, 100,000 or something like that. And then it went, you know, 200, 300, 400, 500,000.
He just thought, you know, this music was so good that everybody would immediately figure that out, and it was just going to go through the roof.
The red part ended up at 32,000, so it was not a whole lot of red in the thermometer. It was recommended by Atlantic after the first album that we break the band up because nothing was ever going to emerge from the South.
By this time, we were making a little money, and so we rented this little farm. So there was so much traffic in and out of there, you know, with friends and musicians and everything. We started laughably calling it Idlewild South after Idlewild Airport in New York.
We were rehearsing for Idlewild South, and Tom's out front saying, who the hell is that? And Phil said, that's the Allman Brothers. He said, get them out of there and get them in the studio right now. They're ready. They are ready to go. We need to get the Criteria in Miami, so that's what we did.
Idlewild South kind of bit the dirt. And we didn't really get discouraged.
Disappointed, but not disheartened by the whole thing because there were enough of the right people that were attracted to this band.
We were down there playing. Tommy Dowd was there recording a band called Derek and the Dominoes. My brother asked Dad if it was all right if maybe he came down and just watched for a little while. And he laughed and says, watch, hell, come on down and play. We went down there to the studio. They played us Layla, but it didn't have the...
Layla was Tom Dowd knowing that Eric needed some help. They were floundering around down there with all this music, but they had no spark. In walks Duane Allman, and he set fire to those guys.
And Eric Clapton was calling him the greatest guitar player in the world, and he was the guy. It was just all about brilliant, tasty playing. So Duane said, you know, we need the freedom of a live album, and that'll give people that don't see us in person an opportunity to really hear what the Allman Brothers are all about. It was a brilliant idea. make it a double LP. Jerry Wexler said, you know, this is nonsense. He said, you know, you got cuts on this thing 25 minutes long. You've got to edit this thing, cut it down to a single album, and otherwise we're not going to put it out. And I said, now let me tell you the other part of this thing. I said, you know, our image is that this is the people's band. Music is for the people, and therefore, we want to make this specially priced. He said, specially priced? What do you mean? I said, we want to sell it for $6.98. He said, you are crazy. When that album came out, it was a massive, massive hit.
There are not many critics that wouldn't rank that as one of the best live albums in the canon.
This was really an expression of their region, of their environment, their culture. For the first time in rock, Southern guys were making the music and living in the South.
We had a little time off from the road. And I was in a nightclub somewhere jamming.
This guy walked over and said, we have an emergency phone call for you at the telephone station. And it was Carolyn. And she said, I've got some bad news for you. Duane was in an accident on his motorcycle, and they had him in surgery for several hours. And they would bring him around partially. But he has died. He is dead now.
I mean, the Duane Allman death was so unexpected. You know, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like losing your brother or your sister.
He always looked out for me, and believe me, I felt it when he died. You know, I felt it like my crutch broke, you know, and that further pisses you off at yourself, and it further makes you look like just some kind of weakling. And you don't realize how much you're leaning on people until they die. Death is so final. I weighed out at about 152 pounds, 6'1.5". Boy, I had to tie knots in my legs to make knees. I was in pretty bad shape. We all were.
We kind of all just stumbled around in the dark there for a while.
We were going to take 6 months off and just kind of regroup, but after about 6 weeks, we started going nuts.
All we knew is we needed to get back to work, or we were going to go crazy, or we were just going to start taking a bunch of dope until we died.
They went out and they played Hofstra, I believe, on Long Island the first night. They had put Duane's guitar on a stand out there, and there was a spotlight on his place, and so they totally destroyed the place.
You know, all our friends was encouraging us, you know, you guys just have a great band, and of course Atlantic Records didn't think so. They let us go. Son of a bitch.
I don't ever remember anybody doubting whether they would go on or not.
We got about 3/4 of the way through the album. That's where we recorded Melissa.
Melissa was my brother's favorite song that I'd ever written.
Sweet Melissa.
And initially the album was called Eat a Peach for Peace, and then we dropped the for peace.
And if you look on the record, it still says dedicated to a brother, and it'll say eat a peach, and then for peace. He named the thing because it was during Vietnam, right?
Duane was being interviewed. He was asked, "What are you doing for the revolution?" Duane said, "Revolution?" He said, "Man, there ain't no revolution. It's all evolution. Times are changing. That's what it's all about." And he said, "I tell you what I do for peace." You can't print this probably. He says, I eat a peach for peace. Two-legged Georgia kind.
Warner Brothers picked us up, and we had the biggest record we ever had.
That was the same year that I cut Laid Back, my first solo record.
See the fact is more less. You're gambling with your own happiness.
Got Johnny Sandlin and said, "Man, let's go cut this record."
Johnny called me and said, "Would you like to play on Greg's record?" Yeah, I was unemployed at the time.
So I told the other guys in the band about it. I said, "You know, there's this guy down here that really plays his piano." I went in there one night to record, and I said, "Hey, man, how would you like to come with the Allman Brothers?" He'd just taken a big drink of coffee. I thought he was going to choke on it.
We're still kind of finishing Greg's record and then starting a new record with the Allmans. And we had gotten a week into the sessions when Barry Oakley had his untimely, unfortunate accident.
He ran into the side of a bus on his motorcycle, and I don't think he was wearing a helmet. And he said, "You know, I'm fine, I'm gonna go home." And then he started having really bad headaches, and they took him to the hospital, and he died.
The only thing that helped us with that is we could kind of see it coming, because Oakley just couldn't get over losing his buddy. And so we kind of see Oakley going downhill with the, you know, just grief and booze and drugs.
By this point, I'm thinking, oh God, I better make my will because I'm going to be next.
By that time, we're so damn tough. We just said, you know, there's so many people that want to see us play, you know. Let's keep going.
We sat down, we had some meetings, and we discussed bass players.
Lamar was the first person that I suggested, and Lamar and I grew up together.
So we carried on with Lamar, and we finished the record, and then prepared to go out on tour.
Some particular critic was doing an article on the Allman Brothers, and it said Phil Walden should be credited for being very clever in having an integrated band from the South. I said, you know what? There are two black guys in that band. I never thought about it.
We also happened to become the #1 band in the country. We were drawing more people to concerts than any other band in the U.S. We were selling more albums.
Brothers and Sisters, that album went to #1 the first week of release. It was unbelievable. But that had Rambling Man on it.
I got an old buddy down here, it's old cowboy, and he would say, "Well, Dookie, how you doing? Playing your music and doing the best you can, I guess," you know, old cowboy. And that line stuck in my head. We're at the end of the album, and they said, we need one more song. So I said, well, I got this song. I said, I think it's too country. I was going to, pitch it in Nashville.
And then all of a sudden, it's a smash hit. And now all of a sudden, that's Southern rock.
We were riding home.
Having a good time down on the bayou, Lord. And them Delta women think the world of me. I was born a rambling man.
Have a Saturday night in Macon on the turntable in your own living room with the Allman Brothers Band, Brothers and Sisters, and the Marshall Tucker Band. Albums and tapes on Capricorn. Make every night Saturday night with Capricorn Records.
We were proud of the fact that we had this little record company and we're doing really well from Macon, Georgia.
They had all the racial crap that went on and bad feelings, and suddenly here's some music, something positive, something good, and it's something that Southerners could be proud of.
We got to befriend Jimmy Carter, and he came to see us because he thought we were doing a lot for the state.
So we all thought, well, this is cool. Our governor is coming down here to hear us play.
Governor Jimmy Carter. I'm going to say 4 things.
When you're running for political office, where do you go to? You go to your friends.
First of all, I'm running for president.
He said, well, I've decided that I'm going to run for president. And I said, president of what?
Secondly, I'm going to be elected.
We had been through the Nixon era.
The country needed somebody who would not lie.
Third, this is very important. I need your help. Will you help me?
He said, we're going to be broke before our caucus unless we can raise some money. And he says, can you do some concerts?
And fourth, I want to introduce to you my friends and your friends, the ones that are going to help me get elected along with you, the great Allman Brothers.
Millions of dollars, and then the government had to match that.
And it was all the so-called bad boys of Southern rock and roll.
Mr. Carter got their answer.
Jimmy Carter came along and announced that the days of segregation were over with. That was the first governor that had ever done that in Georgia.
At that time period, Jimmy Carter restored Georgia from the Dark Ages. When he asked us to help him out, we said, sure, because of who he was.
You are very interested in rock music.
Yes, I am. I'm not only interested in it from what it signifies in our society, but also I enjoy it. And in addition to that, have a close friendship with some of the performing groups and have been helped greatly by them during the campaign.
So it all started with a bunch of Southern rock and rollers helping a friend raise some money, but giving him credibility at the same time.
This was all leading up to a grand climax of Jimmy Carter getting elected president.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
He may not have got elected without that help.
Well, here we have some Southern rock and rollers who were so proud of Jimmy Carter, one of their own, going to Washington. I think Carter was proud of the fact that you have the top rock and roll bands in the world from the South, not the Beatles from Liverpool or the Rolling Stones from England somewhere, the Grateful Dead from California. You've got, Southern rock and roll.
But the country players, they don't mind telling you.
Those songs will be played on the radio and somebody will be digging it when we're long gone.
This is a verse I wrote that nobody's ever heard. Now when I die, don't put me in no graveyard. Lord, that's one place I don't want to be. Lay me down somewhere along the highway, Lord. Let that old summer wind take care of me. Rambling all over now. Lord, I was on a rambling man.
I think John Coltrane was a person with a lot of emotion inside. It was like very, very much a volcano that erupted internally, except when he played. I think there are qualities in Coltrane's music which are very, very human, personal qualities. There's a great spirituality, there's a great kindness, a dedication sometimes bordering on obsession.
In all aspects of his life, whether it was music or whether it was religion or whether it was drugs or drink, he was a totally, you know, a very obsessive person.
I just think it was tragic that, you know, he died so young because of, you know, the kind of life he lived before he really got completely self-conscious and understood what he wanted to do. I think he was searching, like all of us.
Starting in 1945, John Coltrane's career spanned the most vibrant years of modern jazz. His most influential period began when he set up his own group in 1960. The way he played is still admired today, a way of blowing saxophone with a human quality.
I think he was trying to get more in contact with the human voice, you know, because a lot of times it's referred to as, you know, more of a scream or a cry, you know. What he was doing, like in the early 60s, he really started to change the sound of the instrument. Journalists and critics used to think that Coltrane was very angry because he always sounded so hard and, you know, like sort of you know, he'd play like really with a lot of energy and fire in the music. And when they spoke to him, he was one of the gentlest man that, you know, they could ever have interviewed, you know, so I guess it's just the sound that he had in his head, and he tried to get it out.
Delving into himself, Coltrane fed a range of emotions in his music. An incident in Birmingham, Alabama inspired him to write one of his most powerful compositions. On September 15th, 1963, the white Ku Klux Klan bombed a Sunday school, killing 4 young black girls. Coltrane's response was, Alabama.
Now, even if you don't know that that came out of the killing of those girls by the Klan, you know, in that bombing, when you hear that, that is such a deeply sad, reaching piece that it will make you feel that even if you don't know the specifics of it. See, that's what art does. It will make you feel that sadness.
Coltrane developed his art playing clubs, at first in Philadelphia and then in New York, where he arrived at the end of the 1940s. New York clubs were hotbeds for jazz experimentation. On stage, Coltrane learned the technique of using popular songs as a framework for improvisation.
In jazz, a song is just a suggestion, because in jazz, so much of what you put into a song is improvisation. And improvisation is playing at the spur of the moment, you know, playing what you feel at the moment. So a jazz musician can play a song over and over and over again and still find inspiration based on the moment, and communicate that inspiration with that song. You know, Coltrane playing My Favorite Things. This is a song which he played over and over and over again, but the song, the composition, My Favorite Things, was just a suggestion. It was just kind of a emotional territory from which he could, he could branch off and explore and communicate something different with that song night after night after night.
My Favorite Things was sung by Julie Andrews in the popular film The Sound of Music. Andrews played a nun, somewhat different from the image of a jazz musician.
Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things.
I think My Favorite Things, as corny as people may think it is as a song, it's a beautiful melody and a beautiful harmony to go along with that melody. And, you know, right there, that's material for a jazz musician to work with and to mold into his or her own vision.
I think he saw the inherent beauty in the actual motifs of the tune, that opening. When you take it out of its context of the, you know, the show and the movie and this big sort of show tune, it's actually a really haunting, sad melody line. And I think he went for that. He went straight to the melody line and said, this is an amazingly beautiful melody line. And basically what he did with the rest of the tune was he stripped out all the unnecessary parts of it and, you know, he completely simplified it. And I think that's where its beauty is.
My Favorite Things was the first recording on which Coltrane used the soprano sax. The soprano had been forgotten in post-war modern jazz. This is ironic because it was played by the man credited as the first serious jazz sax player, Sidney Bechet. Coltrane rediscovered the instrument in his search to find tones he could not reach with his tenor.
Well, for example, like the track My Favorite Things, I mean, you can play it on tenor. It will sound a little like this, though. Which is fine, but when he played it on soprano, I think he did it for a reason, because there's a much more lyrical, plaintive, almost haunting sound to the soprano, which in a sense suits the melody, it serves the melody line much, much better.
The saxophone was invented by Adolphe Sax in 1846. Sax devised a correct way to finger keys to make notes. Coltrane didn't want to be confined to formulas and explored ways to express more with his saxophone. One technique was false fingering.
False fingering is another way to finger a certain pitch or a certain note on the saxophone. There's usually one correct way to finger that note. For a middle C on the saxophone, that's the correct fingering. It presents the note in the kind of purest, most natural way. But there's other fingerings that will create the same note, but with a different texture or different tonal quality. You might not be able to tell the difference there, but if I play the two fingerings, the real and the false, back to back, you'll hear the difference. And I think the key is to try to use it musically. I mean, it's easy to learn the fingerings, but to try to create something musically is a whole other matter.
Coltrane went further than finding new ways to play the saxophone. he changed parts of the instrument itself. Inside the mouthpiece is a reed which vibrates when the musician blows. The thickness of the reed shapes the tonal quality of the saxophone. This thickness can be adjusted by clipping or shaving the reed. Coltrane was obsessed to find the right thickness. Like other sax players, he would even grind down the metal of the mouthpiece itself.
When it gets to the point of taking minutest particles of metal out of it, it can be very crucial. For example, if you take too much metal from the tip, you will completely damage the sound. You won't be able to get a sound at all out of the mouthpiece. So it's really, really minute measurements, and it's a really fine edge. You can take a mouthpiece to the point where you just take the tiniest scraping off it, and you will ruin the mouthpiece completely. It will be unplayable. It happened to Coltrane on a couple of occasions, I believe. Right before he made the Crescent album, he was completely happy with the mouthpiece he had, but he still wanted that little extra thing from it, and then he completely damaged the mouthpiece. And so just before Crescent was made, he was playing on a completely new mouthpiece, which by all accounts he was dissatisfied with, yet he managed to produce a beautiful sound out of it.
The mouthpiece makes a difference, but it's a technical difference. It's not an emotional difference. Ultimately, your sound is not about this or your fingers or anything physical. It's about what you hear and what you feel. Your sound is your soul. So if you truly have a connection with yourself, then you're going to achieve your sound on any instrument and any mouthpiece, any reed. I mean, for as much as Coltrane changed mouthpieces and carved out mouthpieces and messed with them and had, garbage bags full of mouthpieces, the story goes. For as much as he was obsessive about it, he always had his sound. No matter what mouthpiece Coltrane is playing, it's him because his sound was his soul and his emotion.
But Coltrane's search for his sound took him to the darkest places. Like many other jazz musicians of the 40s and 50s, he tried anything to find inspiration. What he used was dangerous, but powerful.
Each guy chooses his own way. At that time, especially, there was a lot of that going on. I managed to avoid most of that, but there were times when I liked to smoke marijuana, and suddenly I'm totally immersed, like a door opens up. Thing is that if you play very inspired that way, if it's recorded and you listen the next day, you have to get stoned to listen to it too.
Decades before the excesses of rock and roll bands, jazz musicians were taking drugs. Black neighborhoods were actually targeted by white drug pushers, including the late-night world of jazz clubs. In the 1940s, Coltrane became a heroin user. Sometimes drug taking was the only way to become part of a group.
I never really had that problem, but I know that existed. People that were taking the drugs wanted to hire people so that we'd be available. If they didn't have any, the drummer would have some or whatever.
Drugs took their toll on jazz musicians, and many died young. Drugs almost destroyed Coltrane's career until in 1957, he kicked the habit. He stopped drinking, turned vegetarian, and studied Eastern religion. In the early 60s, this spiritualism was in tune with a younger audience.
Coltrane benefited from the Woodstock attitude. You had an audience there prepared philosophically for something different, something new, something that struck them as being anti-establishment, that helped to make him the great seller that he was. He was making a lot of money and selling a lot of records in jazz terms.
But all the money that Coltrane earned during the 60s was not enough to buy him the one thing he didn't have: time. recorded music, and playing live. Recorded tunes were limited to 3 minutes. Live, John Coltrane was known to have played non-stop for 2 hours.
You get into a state of meditation, a sort of a meditative state where time just flies. You don't know that you've been playing for 2 hours. And I think that's what he must have felt. It's like, wow, 2 hours must have seemed like 2 minutes.
Well, the thing is, he used to practice personally on the instrument himself between 12 and 14 hours a day, you know, so he used to pass out from exhaustion from just practicing all day. So 2 hours was nothing to him. He could play one song for 2 hours, you know.
In October 1961, Coltrane headlined at the Village Vanguard, one of the oldest jazz clubs in New York. The reaction was extreme. On one occasion, a waitress was seen holding her ears screaming, "I can't stand it anymore." His experiments simply didn't fit the club environment.
I think it's difficult because then it's frustrating for the club owners because they like to sell drinks, and if the audience is all totally wrapped up in the music for 2 hours at a stretch, then the rate at which they buy drinks drops off. Everybody knows that. So it didn't fit in the club situation, it didn't fit in the concert situation, but he was nevertheless driven to break those rules and to be difficult in that way.
Coltrane was one of the first to push time limits of tunes on his long players or LPs. These limits had been set in the 1920s when recordings were cut onto 10-inch records. These discs only allowed for around 3 minutes of recording. In 1948, Columbia introduced the 12-inch LP, which allowed 30 minutes of music. They were mastered on magnetic tape and meant that musicians could play for much longer. Technology allowed the players to be more self-indulgent.
Tape and the LP together created an opportunity for people to stretch out. It also made a lot of people lose that discipline of saying what you have to say in a chorus or two choruses, which is not to say, and I really don't want to go on record, that there's not a lot of truly amazing 10 and 20-minute performances, but there's also a lot of extremely boring ones too.
For the jazz soloist, it is my view that only the very greatest jazz musicians can sustain a solo for more than a minute or so. After that time, they're simply repeating themselves, they're flailing, they're flapping their fingers. Not true of a Coltrane, not true of a Charlie Parker, not true of a Bix Beiderbecke, the great ones. They can sustain it for longer, but that's very rare. The problem with the LP is that it allowed everybody to just go on soloing for five minutes at a stretch. No thought to structure, no thought to organizing the material in some sensible way. It's just bang away and bang away and bang away. And I think that really that 3-minute form had a lot of values because it contained you.
Coltrane's music couldn't be further from the 3-minute form. He no longer based his explorations on recognizable song structures. The music alienated many jazz lovers and scared off the record business. The style has been called free jazz.
I guess improvisation is spontaneous melodies being made up all the time, but over a given structure. So you have to work within the constrictions of the chord sequence. And with free music, what they did was they took away the chord sequence as well. So they improvise in melodies and improvise in a structure as well as you go along, so it's spontaneous composition totally.
You have to keep the music fresh. The sound of surprise, as one of the writers talked about it. So when jazz is no longer surprising, then perhaps it's no longer jazz. If you're always looking for something to be fresh and hopefully have something new about it, then you will try all kinds of possibilities.
Dropping structures was an attempt to make the music simpler, but music without structure put up new barriers.
The barriers, well, attracting an audience might be a barrier because, you still got to eat, you still got to live, and for free music, it's a minority, very small minority. Even though jazz is a minority music overall, free music is even more so, so you don't have much of an audience, and there's a running joke that within musicians that when you talk about free music, you ask, oh, you mean you don't want to get paid? It's free.
In the end, it's all labels and terminologies which don't bear very close inspection. It's as free as it is. Once it's been played, it's fixed and it's gone anyway, unless it was recorded, in which case it's a recording, and the next time it gets played, it won't be the same. So there's a philosophy, there's a degree of emotional involvement and a sense of time and place, which are very important. And moving on with the times, as your life moves on, as your experiences develop, and trying to reflect what you've learned back into the music, put that back into the music, have the music grow and develop as you grow and develop.
Today, Coltrane's influence can be heard in the free jazz movement. His music was anchored in rhythms supplied by his drummer, Elvin Jones.
He'll play a pattern like this. What he's doing is just opening everything up, so there's so much air in between the notes that you think, Jesus, he doesn't know where he is, The key is this. This is always doing that. And if anybody knows Elvin, whenever he's watching any of the younger players play, he'll always look at you and go, that's the key. This keeps the time. Everything else flows around the hi-hat. The way I kind of hear Elvin Jones's drumming, and also the way Elvin Jones's drumming worked in tandem with McCoy Tyner's piano playing, is this almost wave effect. I felt that they were creating this wave of rhythm and harmony that Coltrane could kind of ride the crest of. That's the imagery that makes the most sense to me.
Time finally got the better of him. In 1965, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. John Coltrane died 2 years later. He was 41 years old.